Hi guys, I'm gonna try to get through Sophia's birth story as quick as possible since my 2-year-old is sleeping. My 6-year-old is off to school. He is in first grade, and we're actually planning on homeschooling him at some point in the year, but I wanted to make sure that I could stay consistent with it, so I'm gonna wait a couple months and see exactly where I'm at emotionally. So, Sophia was born July 26th. Just this year, 2013, but I'm going to rewind to after Bryce was born. And Bryce was born August 11th, 2011, after 4 weeks of labor that was stopped with medication. I was 2.5 to 3 centimeters that entire time, and he was born 3 weeks early anyway. My water broke at 37 weeks on the dot, and he was born quickly thereafter. No issues. I did use Pitocin because obviously we had been on medication for 4 weeks and I was exhausted, so I did get an epidural. My oldest son too, I have no idea what early labor feels like with him because my water broke and I had back labor, and when I went into the hospital with him I was 3 centimeters and I stayed 3 centimeters for like 27 hours. And when it was starting to look like we were going to end up having to get a C-section, I just decided to get an epidural, and sure enough, 3 hours later, he was born. So I have no idea what real active labor contractions feel like. So, and that's important for Sophia's birth story. After Bryce was born, we wanted to start to try to have another one, but I was breastfeeding, so we were waiting to see my cycles and see how they would work. At about 4.5 months, Bryce stopped breastfeeding consistently and would cry every time we tried. And one of the things that I heard was that if you're pregnant, sometimes your baby can reject your breast milk and their attitude changes towards breastfeeding. So I decided to take a test, and sure enough, we were pregnant and we were thrilled. And a week later, I went to the commissary and I found out that I was bleeding and we were miscarrying. So we decided we weren't going to breastfeed anymore. We really wanted to try to have another baby. And we started trying, and in July we found out we were pregnant again, and sure enough, a week later I was spotting and it freaked me out. And it wasn't a lot either. It was just the tiniest amount, like really you would have never even thought anything. But I was scared, so we went to the hospital and my numbers weren't doubling, which isn't a good sign. So when you're pregnant, you want your HGC levels to double every week, or double, every 72 hours, and it had been a week and they hadn't even doubled. So that's no bueno. That's not good. They told me that they couldn't do anything there because that wasn't my hospital. We were actually on a marriage retreat when this happened. So we went back and scheduled an appointment with my OB for 2 days later, which was Monday. And when we went in, he did an ultrasound and it was an ectopic pregnancy. I had to go in for an emergency surgery, and he was able to save my tube, which is lucky, and he cleared both tubes. But he also found the remnants from the pregnancy that we had in January in my tube, which meant that it must have dissolved, and that's kind of how my body just flushed it. So that was 2 ectopics last year. Let's see. So after I had that ectopic, I was completely devastated. I really didn't have a strong faith back then, so I wasn't really like on track with the whole, God's got me taken care of thing. I really didn't believe it at that point. So I decided to get a job and not worry about anything and just kind of do whatever. But we were still trying because we did want to grow our family. And in November, we found out that we were pregnant again, and we were excited. And this time we waited until it was 12 weeks along to tell anybody. And we actually announced it at Christmas, so I'm not sure if I was exactly 12 weeks, but I was pretty close. I'm not a very patient person. So we paid for the 3D ultrasound to find out if we were having a boy or a girl at 15 weeks, and we found out we were having a girl, which is what we wanted because we have 2 boys, and I was thrilled. We were both excited. We already had the name picked out. She was going to be Sophia Marilyn. Marilyn was after my grandmother. Later we found out that Sophia was actually my great-grandmother's name, but we had no idea at the time. And we called everybody and everyone was excited. And then we did the normal pregnancy stuff, and it was pretty uneventful. It was really sick in the beginning. I didn't gain a whole bunch of weight in the beginning. And that's pretty much the only crazy thing that happened. So then in PWOC, which is my Bible study group, you'll hear me talk a lot about that because it's very important to me. But in one of our PWC meetings, one of the girls who was there told me that she was a doula, and she was learning and training and getting certified to become a doula, and she needed people to be, you know, her birthing people. I don't know. And she asked me if I would be interested in having her as my doula, which of course I was, and luckily her husband didn't have to move, so she was able to be my doula. The Saturday, okay, don't quote me on that, it was either the Friday or the Saturday, everything's kind of a blur from that week. I was in labor and we decided to go to the hospital, and then I called my doula and she met us there, and I think they kept me for 5 minutes and then let me go because the contractions just weren't strong enough. And remember, I don't know what active contractions feel like, so this is your whole clue in on that. So we went home and tried to get labor to start, but it didn't, so I just decided to go to bed, and that was that. So then Tuesday I had my doctor's appointment and everything was great, and he told me not to even come in next Tuesday, that I was being induced that following Wednesday. So that would be 8 days later. So basically we just started preparing everything and making sure we had our bags packed and all that for the induction. He did sweep my membranes and try to get things started. That night I started to have labor, or so I thought again, and my doula came and we walked around and they started to get very close together, so we decided to go to the hospital. And as always, whenever you go to the hospital and something's wrong, it's like it disappears for a while. And I didn't have contractions for a little bit, but then they started to get close together and they were getting really intense, and then like all of a sudden they spaced out but got stronger. It was really weird. And at that point my doctor came in and told me that it wasn't active labor, I wasn't changing, and I had a choice of either staying and seeing if anything changed or going home and relaxing. And Sophia's heartbeat was fine, everything was great, and I was exhausted. So we decided to go home, and sure enough they stopped, and I had maybe 2 an hour for like the next day. I mean, it was just not anything I would have ever think, and I could feel her moving and she was completely fine. Thursday night I went to bed and I felt her move, and the next morning at like 3 o'clock in the morning my youngest son woke up, and so I went to check on him, and that is when I noticed that I was having some weird pain and had no idea what it was. I want to say at 6 o'clock we woke up and started our normal day, and then the contractions started to come, but they weren't close at all. It was about, I want to say 8:30 that I got on Facebook to contact my doula, just to tell her that they were kind of weird, like they didn't feel normal. The description I used when I messaged her was I felt like I'd been doing sit-ups for a week and they were just not comfortable, like my whole stomach just hurt. And you know, obviously I had no idea what was happening, and neither did she. And she couldn't access my contractions obviously over Facebook, so she said to give her a call, but my phone was dead. And I wanted to take a shower, so I figured I would plug it in and contact her, and I told her in about a half hour. So I went upstairs, plugged my phone into a charger that didn't work as usual, and I took a shower, and my shower took an hour. Everything hurt, like it was ridiculous. I couldn't do anything without having to stop for like 2 minutes, and it was just bad. And at that point I realized something wasn't right, that this was probably real labor and I needed to get out and go. But it took me an hour to get out of the shower, to get washed off, or dried off, sorry, and to get dressed. And the time that I knew that I had to call my husband was when I asked my son to get my younger son a cookie for a snack off the counter, and he gave him fruit snacks and gave himself a ring pop, which, yum, perfect snack. And I yelled at him for it because I had specifically asked him to do something and he didn't follow my instruction. And that's when I knew, like, I wasn't thinking right, and I was just in a lot of pain. Um, so I called my husband first at 9:30, and he came home and took the kids and dropped them off over at the neighbors. And I called my doula shortly after I called my husband. It took her about 25 minutes to get to our house. It took my husband 20 minutes to get to my house. We labored for a while at home, and they started to get really close together. And I was really worried at that point because I needed to have antibiotics because I was positive for group B strep. I wasn't positive with my youngest, and I was positive with my oldest. So I kind of knew the routine, and you had to be on that for 4 hours for the baby to get all that it needs. So we decided that it was time to go in, and they were really close together.